Welcome to Fort Worth 148's podcast, where we meet to discuss Masonic topics and strive to build value in the brotherhood. The opinions and statements of the participants do not represent any positions or stance of any Grand Lodge or Lodge and are solely the viewpoints of the participants. Welcome back to the podcast, brothers. This is Rhit Moore, past master of Fort Worth 148.
This is Billy Hamilton, current senior warden for Fort Worth 148.
This is Gabriel Jagush, junior warden for Fort Worth 148. And we have a special guest today.
Hey, this is Lane Pierce. I'm a past master of White Rock number 234 and currently serving as the junior warden of Ford Lodge number 270. I'm also on the Masonic Education Services Committee for the Grand Lodge of Texas, and I'm the program administrator for the York Rite Leadership Program. Thanks for inviting me, guys.
Cool.
Thanks for being
awesome
on.
to have you.
Thank you for joining us.
And from what I understand, we'll have Avi slip in the back door here in a minute. So that's why he's not being introduced. And I will roll right into the NPR moment and just make it quick and easy. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast yet, please do. Even if you don't listen all that much, subscribe. It helps us out, and leave feedback for us. So rate us and leave feedback. And then contact us if you got any questions.
You know, catch us at Grand Lodge, too, and ask us directly.
We always love direct reviews, especially good ones.
So do we have a discussion question today, Rhit?
Let's see. I'm looking at these. Did you guys add these or did I add these?
I think you added these, Rhit. I don't know, Rhit, I'll ask you then. Rhit, can an entered apprentice receive a Masonic burial?
It seems like we went over that, but yes, they can. Absolutely, they can. You find that in Grand Lodge law. I think it is even mentioned in the monitor, but they are a Mason. They're a brother. And I bring that up because so many, even older brothers, their families don't know their wishes when it comes to Masonic funerals and last rites. And so the family's kind of left to make that decision. And that's so tough. You know what I mean? It's already a tough enough situation. So if you want one, let them know. If you don't, let them know. You know, get the funeral kind of in order for your family to where they don't have to deal with that stuff.
There's a couple of good templates, too, online that I found when I was doing research when I wrote about the Knight Templar burial for the Knight Templar magazine. If you go online, there are a couple of planning guides that can be put together, and they're already pre-printed. You just fill in the blanks, right? And just make sure that your loved ones have copies. Some of the Masonic Service Bureau websites, I think, have them. You'd be surprised. Some of the funeral homes actually have specific Masonic planning guides as well. There's a lot of good resources out there. So you don't have to, try and think what you want to have done on the top of your head, and it's a good, easy way to make sure that you can have that conversation early, because if you pass away and no one knows about it, quite simply, the lodge or whatever Masonic body you want to have a service from, they're just going to simply follow the wishes of the family. Mm-hmm. So, if you want it,
should.
Right. Yeah. If you want it done, make sure you talk to your family in advance. No one likes to talk about death, but that's, kind of one of the lessons that we hit home over and over again in Masonic rituals is, that one day we're going to shuffle off this mortal coil, and we need to be concerned about the legacy that we leave behind.
From the moment you were born, you began to die.
Yes, I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That is
Coffin in the cradle.
Hey guys, something that you and the listeners may not be aware of, but in the Grand Lodge of Texas leadership training program that's done by the Masonic Education Services Committee, We've got a program. There's a year 1 and year 2 program for the guys, and there's also a program for the ladies. So those of you that are senior deacons, junior wardens, senior wardens that are coming to leadership, be sure you sign up your ladies and bring them. In the ladies program, one of the things that we do is we talk about a Masonic funeral service. And we also give them a Masonic funeral guide and encourage them to sit down with their Mason and to drag them kicking and screaming through it. So they, the wives and widows, understand what it is that our brother wants. And they can then tell us so that we can conduct the funeral service in the appropriate way. So to the question, yes, entered apprentices and fellow crafts, they are members of the craft and are entitled to Masonic burial services, as are unaffiliated Masons with the Worshipful Master's permission.
So there's one in there about suspended members as well for NPD, non-payment of dues. There's a caveat for master's discretion as well, because, if you've got a brother's family requesting the last rites, barring he got expelled or something, there's more than likely some wiggle room to make that happen.
Absolutely. And so, while we were talking, I just did a quick look in the law book. It's Article 359. Is to whom Masonic burial services can be extended. And Article 360 is to whom not extended. So that's definitely worth a read, just to bone up.
So what's interesting is when I was doing the research for that article, I came across an old copy of the Grand Lodge Constitution from, I believe it was New York, from the late 1800s. And in there was a list of Masonic offenses. And one of them was if a son who was a brother had a father who was suspended or expelled, that if he put Masonic symbols on his headstone, it was actually in quotes, a grave offense. So I thought that was interesting.
Certainly no pun intended.
Right.
And if you follow me on Facebook, you would know that I love that joke. So.
So let's see. The next one on here is I am or I know a brother who has not been active and moved from the area, from his mother lodge, but's getting the itch again. And he's not going back to lodge because he's embarrassed. He doesn't know the signs. He doesn't know the protocols. So when this brother reaches out to you, how does that conversation go for you?
Well, I'll dive in first.
There you go.
I've actually had this experience a couple of times. Last year, I was the secretary for White Rock Lodge, and I made it my mission to call and verbally contact every single member on our list. And I got through most of them. But there were actually 2 members that I reached out to, and they had this exact situation. It was, I love Masonry. I'd love to get active again, but I don't know. I know enough to get in the door. Mm-hmm. And, I told him, I said, well, brother, we just want to know you're a Mason. We're not trying to keep you out. And I told him, I said, so let's do this. Come have dinner. And as soon as you walk in the door, you ask for me. And, I'll get with you and we'll just make sure everything's on the square and we'll go through the signs and the words. Mm-hmm. And we did that before lodge, in the ante room. And in the second case, the other brother, we actually met for lunch and we visited and kind of got him reacclimate. I guess the key here is to throw them a lifeline, make yourself that chain, that means by which they can move back into the lodge.
I had the same scenario where a brother came up back to lodge and he's same thing. He wasn't even going to come in. He's a member of our lodge and he wasn't even going to come in because he didn't know the protocol. I said, hey, let's go back in this room. We verified all the information because he was before our time. Nobody knew who he was.
Yeah.
But we verified him, made sure he was legit. And, I took him back in the back room where it's private for about 5 minutes, and he came out a whole different guy. He started putting on his apron. He didn't even say a word. He was going to lodge after that. So it can be as simple as that. Throwing in the caveat that they're out of state, maybe you might actually, as secretary or somebody that can vouch for him, go through proper protocol to contact a lodge in his area and say, hey, this guy's going to come visit. I can vouch for him, which that should go through Grand Lodges. So don't just email the lodge directly, but you could help him, ease his transition back into lodge.
Well, and if you remember, it was about 3 or 4 years ago, I was that guy, right? I just showed up. I didn't remember any of the grips or any of the passwords. And I just showed up one day, and man, I felt terrible, like I was less of a Mason because I didn't remember that, but I had stepped away because of my oldest son, right? And it took, because at the time he was having some health problems, and so I ended up going NPD, and it took quite a while. I mean, you guys know the story about it, but yeah, I was that guy, and man, you feel terrible, but it was fantastic once I was able to actually get everything from the Grand Lodge of Oklahoma that said I was legitimate, and to actually be able to sit and lodge again. That first night, I was so nervous, right? I wanted to leave because I'm like, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to look like a fool. But yeah. I am so glad that I actually did it. And, it doesn't take too long before it starts coming back to you.
It's true. Riding a bike, isn't it?
Yeah. And next thing you know, you could help somebody back in the craft that'll be hosting a podcast.
Right.
There you go. Guys, I think one of the keys there is as Masons to remember to remain externally focused, more especially on those brothers whom we don't have a connection with, and work to build a connection with every single brother. That way they've got that lifeline, if you will, back into the lodge. They can feel comfortable, knowing that they're there and they belong there, as opposed to, they're an outsider trying to find a place to fit in.
Yeah. No, and I think you also hit the nail on the head with, the examination process is to keep Cowans out. But if this guy's a Mason, you know what I mean, and we have all the inclination to believe he is, you're going to try to get him in those doors. Mm-hmm. That examination process, it shouldn't be made to, embarrass somebody, I should say.
Agreed.
Yeah, it should work, but we're not out to embarrass anybody. So I'm ready to roll into personal questions. I didn't even realize there was such a list of discussion questions.
It sounds good to me. So Lane, can you tell us a little bit about yourself outside of the Masonic lens?
Sure. I'm not real sure exactly what to tell, but I'm a grandfather. Got a couple of great grandkids that live just 0.8 of a mile away from us. And that's joy. I'll tell you something, especially for you younger guys out there. Grandbabies are your reward for not killing your kids. Just remember that. I like to do some woodworking. My wife and I, we live in Pilot Point, Texas, which is just north of Dallas. We're about halfway between Dallas and the Oklahoma state line. And it's a small community. We absolutely love it out here. We are involved in the local community theater. My wife is up at the theater tonight practicing for a show that they're going to put on. They open tomorrow. And I build sets and, help them do the tech stuff and whatnot. But just as a personal life outside of Masonry, that's, mostly it, hanging around, doing community stuff, trying to make grandbabies happy. Masonically speaking, you know, I'm deeply involved in the education aspect of Freemasonry. But outside of the Masonic lens, it's, you know, work and trying to be a good, upstanding community guy.
Nice. Sounds like you're living the life of Riley.
Yeah, you and I are going to have to chat about woodworking later.
Okay, good. I'll tell you something we did this past summer that's really been a lot of fun is that a year ago, my granddaughter, Sophia, wanted a snow cone. And so we didn't have snow cone stand in town. So we drove to the next town to the east of us, which is Salina, and their snow cone stand was closed. And I came back and I told my oldest daughter, I said, why don't we open a snow cone stand? So this past summer, guys, we opened a snow cone stand.
Nice.
And that's actually been a lot of fun because nobody shows up at a snow cone stand mad.
Yeah.
That's true.
So we do fundraisers for the community, and my kids run it. And, you know, it's made them a little money, and hopefully we'll do even better next year.
Awesome. So when did you join and how old were you?
Gosh, when did I join? I am actually coming up on 25 years, guys. I don't think I've got 25 yet. Probably 23 and a half or 24 years. But 25 years is coming up pretty quick. So how old would I be? I would have been 28 years old, I guess, when I joined. And yeah, so almost 25 years ago.
Nice. So what was the spark? What got you to the doors of Masonry?
You know, that's really a harder question to answer. I don't know what the spark was, but I could tell you what the catalyst was. At the time, I was living in Plano, and I was going through the local newspaper. You know, I don't even remember what it was called, just a little Plano-oriented newspaper. And I came across this little ad, wasn't but maybe 1 inch by 2 inches inside, and it says Plano Masonic Lodge meets on the I think it was at the time the third Thursday at 7:30 p.m. and it happened to be the third Thursday of the month, and it had a phone number there, and for some reason I was inspired to call. Now, the only thing that I knew about Freemasonry was that my uncle was a Mason. And his name is Pat, Uncle Pat. And he lives down in Centerville. He's still a member of the Centerville Masonic Lodge. And my uncle, guys, when I was born, my father had died before I was born. So I grew up with my uncle and my maternal grandfather being my father figures. And the thing that I always could rely on was the kindness of my uncle. He was the most honest, most honorable, nicest man. And I'd like to think that I've modeled myself as a man after him. But I knew of Masonry only in that my uncle was a Mason. And if he was a Mason, then it must be pretty good. So I saw this article. Like I said, it was just a little bitty advertisement. And it was that Thursday night. And for no good reason whatsoever, I picked up the telephone. I dialed that phone number. And a fella answered the phone, who I later learned was a guy named Al Drew. And he picked up the phone and he said, Plano Masonic Lodge. And I guess I probably just stammered for just a second. And I said, my name's Lane Pearson. I want to know about the Masons. And he chuckled a little bit and he said, well, what do you want to know? And I remember saying, hell, man, I don't know enough to ask a question. and that's what Al did. He chuckled and he said, well, give me your number and I'll have somebody call you. And the very next day, a fellow named David Starr called me. And he asked if he could come visit me. And I said, sure. And he came over and he talked to me about Freemasonry. And he explained to me what it was. And the last thing that he did before leaving was he left me a book. And I don't remember the title of the book right now, but it was actually about the history of the Templars. And he left, and with the comment, we'll see you later. Come have dinner at the lodge. And I remember thinking, to me, books are very important. And for a guy to leave me a book and he didn't even know me, was a sign of trust. And so that also committed me to go into the lodge to return the book.
Yeah.
So the next Thursday, I went up and had dinner with them. These guys at the time, and I think they still do, they met every single Thursday night for a dinner, a full dinner. And Al Drew cooked dinner every week. And the dinner was great. I mean, it was a robust dinner, meatloaf and mashed potatoes and biscuits and the obligatory green bean, cake and ice cream. It was the whole lot. And so I went up that next week, and I met a whole host of guys there. Eddie Brown was the master of the lodge at the time. Buddy Luttrell, I think, was the senior or junior warden. Just a bunch of guys. A fellow named Harry Powell, Tiny Powell, was secretary of the lodge, and he's since passed. But I remember guys sitting there having dinner with all these fellas, listening to them talk and talking with them, and the acceptance that they had of me being there was appreciated. And they said, okay, well, we're going to go into the meeting and you go on and come back and see us some other time. And I left that lodge with light feet. And I had this realization that maybe for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by a bunch of men who had a common mindset that was similar to mine, a mindset of prosperity, a mindset of not being a victim, personal accountability, a mindset of being willing to be of service to your fellow man. And that felt pretty good. And that was my introduction to Masonry right there. And on that introduction, they couldn't run me off. I just kept coming back.
No, and I love the way you put it, because most stories of people joining Masonry, there are the national treasures such as Gabe, that Gabe had no one in his family that he knew as a Mason, but most come to our doors because of someone that they knew, growing up, that influenced them. It's like, well, if he's a Mason, it must not be bad. Because, I've heard that said from my aunts about my grandfather, that it can't be bad if my dad was a part of it. And, I had an uncle that was a Mason that profoundly affected me and what Masonry was, and ultimately joined because, my dad and grandpa and all those guys were. But that's our best recruiting tool. And that's what I love about the law that we can't ask, because that highlights the fact that we have to show, we have to act. We're not out just saying, hey, we've got this stuff. We're showing people. And that's our best way to recruit new members.
I agree. Now, I got to tell you guys the rest of that story. So I spent several months going up and having dinner with these guys and getting to know them because I needed people to sign my petition. And I never talked to my uncle about it until I got my petition together, and I wanted to put him down as a recommender. And so I called my uncle up. And remember, this is the guy that I honor and revere as a symbol of manhood, right? And so I called him up and I said, Uncle Pat, I got something to tell you. He said, okay. And I said, well, I've decided to join the Masonic Lodge. And there was this long pause. And he said, well, I hope you can stand up to it.
Ooh, I love it.
And boy, I got real nervous all of a sudden. But
Man.
it was a very inspirational thing for him to say to me.
Yeah, I love that. That's part of the initiatic process. Get you a little rattled a little bit.
Yeah.
So, what's kept you engaged in Masonry after you joined for all these years?
Gosh, two things really. Number one, the opportunity to be of service. All my life, I've been in service. In fact, it's my opinion that if you ever find a Mason, you find a man that has a heart of service. I've never met a true Mason that didn't live a life of service to his fellow man. So the opportunity to be of service is important to me. In Scouts, I was involved with the Red Cross. I was a volunteer firefighter. Even today, I'm a member of the Denton County Medical Reserve Corps as a volunteer down at the theater and so on. So being of service was one key aspect, and being of service to the brethren, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is just the opportunity to create those relationships, and to really get to know a man and have an opportunity to engage with them such that you can experience life through another lens. I remember the time that I met Gabriel. Gabe, I don't know if you remember, but we were at a not a conference, but I forget exactly what it was. But we were having a discussion.
Was it Grand Chapter?
It could have been a Grand Chapter, but I forget. But we were having a discussion, and you were very new into the fraternity.
Extremely.
Yeah. And, we were talking about the topic of discussion was what gets guys excited about Freemasonry? And, how do we engage these young guys? And here in the room was this young guy named Gabriel Jagush, right? And he decides to speak up. And the words of wisdom that fell out of his face, were profound. Because here's a young guy going, why do we vote to pay our bills? We're Masons. Of course we're going to pay our bills.
I remember
Sounds like
now
Gabe.
what that was. What was it, Gabe? That was the Grand Chapter, Grand Council School of Instruction. That was the first year that I went.
School of Instruction. Okay. Yeah. But he started popping off with all this stuff, and here's all these old guys sitting around, and I started tapping him on the shoulder. Said, listen to this guy. Listen, this is important.
And I remember that moment because it had, from what I remember, it was either meant to be a school of instruction. Obviously each room was running its own school of instruction on the different chapter and council degrees. And I think this room in particular was either Mark Master or Royal Arch. And it had somehow devolved into guys think tanking how to attract young guys into the fraternity.
Right.
And at one point, and what triggered me speaking was when James Kirkpatrick, who is currently serving as the most illustrious Grand Master of the Grand Council, I think he was IPC at the time. He turns to me and he says, well, we have one of those millennials right here with us, but nobody's asked him any of the questions that you're asking right now. Why don't we listen to what he has to say?
Yeah,
and it was just kind of this really funny moment when everybody turned around and realized oh, I'm sitting right here. And I had been unusually quiet.
But that's really the second part of my answer to that question is the opportunity to engage with guys and get to know them, not just on a hi, how you doing? My name's Lane perspective, but what's important to them? What do they like to do? How can we combine our forces and do something bigger and better in the world? You look for it, you find it.
Oh. Yeah, amen to that. This podcast is a testament to that. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt. Yeah, I couldn't do it without their help.
Yep. Very true.
So we know you joined Plano Lodge from the newspaper. What offices have you held? I know you were past master, but did you go through the line traditionally or hopscotch?
Somewhat. So I joined Plano 768, and I was with that lodge up until my wife and I moved to Atlanta, Georgia for 5 years. And during that time, I demitted most of my Texas affiliations. Like a bunch of you guys, I've got a lot of dues cards. At one point in time, I was a member of Plano Lodge, Knox Corinthian Lodge, Empire Lodge, St. John's Lodge. There's probably another one in there somewhere.
Goodness.
And so I demitted from most all those lodges and kept one. And then when we moved back to Texas, we moved way out to the north end of town, just south of where I am now, just north of Little Elm. And so Plano was too far away. And at the time, I joined Salina Lodge. There was another lodge in there somewhere, I forget. But I joined White Rock Lodge on an invitation, if you will. Mm-hmm. Some of the guys asked me to come over there and participate because, they were still working on getting their feet underneath them. And so I joined over there, and they elected me as the senior. Let me back up a little bit. At Plano Lodge, I went through junior steward and senior steward, where I learned to cook under Al Drew.
Oh, nice.
Al Drew, for those people that are listening to this podcast that may by chance remember Al Drew from Plano Lodge, he never went into the lodge meetings unless he was told to come in because they wanted to appreciate him. He loved to cook. He was a mechanic by trade, but he was a member of the Order of Cordon Bleu.
Oh, cool.
And he loved to cook, and man, he was good at it. So I learned to cook some really good dishes under Al Drew as a junior steward and senior steward. I went on to become the junior deacon. And then that's when, life-changing events occurred and ended up moving off to Georgia. And so I got out of the line at that point. That's a big, long story. But when I came back, I really wasn't actively participating in any lines, except for some York Rite work in chapter and council and commandery. But then when I went to White Rock is when I became senior warden and then subsequently the master of the lodge.
Nice. So you went from junior deacon to senior warden to worshipful master.
Yeah, as the lineage goes, that would be about right.
There you go. What year was that you got elected senior warden? I guess worshipful master.
I'd have to pull up my electronic file on my Masonic history. I couldn't even begin to tell you. It had to have been 7 years ago.
Yeah, because up until recently, really, it was, because I went from junior steward, senior deacon to senior warden. And in those times, it was just like, we need you. It's almost, we don't have a choice kind of thing.
Yeah.
And
Rhit, that's an important thing and an important topic to consider. I'm junior warden at Ford Lodge now. when I came over to Ford Lodge, they elected me they nominated or appointed me, excuse me. I'll get my terminology right. They appointed me as a senior deacon. And I think I was filling in or I replaced somebody, I forget. But then I was elected to junior warden. And in a lot of my York Rite organizations, we've got guys that are having to rehash their way back through the line.
Yeah.
And I think that's something important that especially those of us that are past masters need to consider doing is putting ourselves back in the rotation and helping to create the time and the opportunity for newer guys so they can go through the chairs and learn the parts, learn how to govern and administer a lodge. We've got to be ready to do that again.
No, I'm with you, because there's nothing like a little time steeping in lodge culture and everything to really get the feel for it. Because I'd been a Mason 4 years before I was master, and I knew I wasn't ready then. And I'll still tell you today, I wish I had another 4 years before it. I would have enjoyed it and been more effective had I had more time. But that just wasn't the case in those days.
Well, and in kind of a similar angle to what you're saying about pasts needing to be willing to rehash, what I'd like to see become more commonplace, and I don't know if I want to see it become the norm, but I wouldn't mind it if it became the norm, is to see masters serve multiple years as their term. Where, hey, we don't have enough guys ready yet. That's okay. I'll just take a second or third year as master. And the lodge will have continuous leadership from the East while we train these guys, And if we have to have a lineup of past masters with one dude going through the line year by year, that's okay. We don't have to change out any officers or anything. As long as the guy who is sitting in the East is willing and the lodge is, favorable to him as a leader. I mean, I think it'd be nicer to see consecutive terms for masters instead of us trying to scramble down and hunt down some poor new guy.
No, I agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
Everybody's going to enjoy it more.
Agreed. And the key to making that work, guys, is we've got to do some planning. Most masters are planning for the next meeting, and they should have been planning for the year.
Yeah.
That's if they're planning for the next meeting. But we've got to do some planning, and we've got to also take the burden off the master of the lodge. And here's what I mean by that. A lot of guys, by the time they become master of the lodge and they complete their term, they're Masonically burned out because 3, 5, or 7 years only to get to this exalted chair called the East. And then all of a sudden, because they haven't been taught the skills, they're not necessarily natural born leaders, and they're responsible for everything. They all of a sudden think that they have to do everything.
Yeah.
And so they just freak themselves out and they burn themselves out by trying to be the guy that organizes and plans everything. And we've got to, us old past masters got to get together and tell them, stop doing that. That's not your job. Appoint a committee, and take responsibilities off of them.
No, and if the lodge doesn't want to do it and help, then maybe they shouldn't be doing it right now.
Well, agreed.
So,
that takes planning.
Right. And one of the bits of advice I've always remembered, I'm trying to keep in mind for next year, should tradition prevail and I assume the East, is I remember one of the older past masters of our lodge had told me that you have to spend time planning your year as worshipful master, because that's the only time you have to really drive your calendar, because once you assume the office, the calendar drives you. You kind of lose most of your input. So you're no longer planning, you're reacting.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, for every man that's been sitting in the East, at some point during the year, there's going to be some crisis that comes up that you're going to have to respond to. And
that's
yeah, and at the leadership training that I do for Grand Lodge, one of my tasks that I do is I do the risk assessment portion. And I come in and I tell all these guys that are the elected officers of the lodge the cold, hard truth. You men are fiduciaries of your lodge.
Mm.
You are in all ways financially and legally liable for that lodge and the health of it. So if you don't file your Form 990 and the lodge loses its tax exempt status, guess who the IRS is going to come to? They're going to come to you.
Yeah.
You guys are, I mean, this is a corporation and you are the officers and you are in every way responsible personally. So dereliction of duty, it will get you in trouble.
Yeah, it could get you in bigger trouble than we realize, because it does seem like just, almost like a thing you just go through as Masons. But, like you said, you're on the hot seat if things go wrong.
That's right. And not just from the brethren, but from the government too.
Yeah.
This is a lot of guys walk in thinking this is the He-Man Woman Haters Club and Spanky's the president.
I love it.
It's a little more complicated than that.
Yes, for sure. So what do you see as the biggest strengths and weaknesses of our fraternity in Texas?
In Texas specifically, I can answer the question, but I don't think it's unique to Texas. I think it's systemic in Masonry in general.
Okay.
Our biggest strength is that we encourage and inculcate the notion of free thinking, and free thinking with a grounded support structure beneath it. So not just stupid thinking, but free thinking grounded in faith, grounded in belief in a supreme being, belief in the immortality of the soul, and things of that nature. What that does is that creates an opportunity to be responsive and to be dynamic in an ever-changing world. In all ways, I am of the opinion that it mimics and mirrors the entire notion of how the nation of the United States of America was founded. Indeed, we know that it was founded, and the founding of it was greatly influenced by Freemasons. And that idea of free thinking is so important to our identity as a nation. It has allowed us to grow and become the greatest nation on the planet. That is also a strength of Freemasonry. As far as a weakness of Freemasonry, I think there's kind of two. And I'm going to say this with as much love and affection as possible.
Yeah, it is a loaded question.
Yeah. The first is that we cheapen Freemasonry.
Yeah.
We pay insufficient dues. We try to hobble along. We want a healthy body, but yet we're not willing to pay for the medicine. It boggles my mind that Freemasonry is as cheap as it is. Now, I know some guys may listen to this and they go, but I'm on a fixed income. Okay, I understand. We're here to help. We're not going to reduce the value of Freemasonry because we don't want to reduce what you get out of it. We want the body to be healthy. But if you need help, we're going to help you because you're our brother, and that's what we do.
No,
Go ahead.
I would even go further in the cheap. that we're giving it away too cheap, in the same sense of the way your uncle told you, I hope you can stand up to it. Mm-hmm. You knew from that moment you were getting into something serious that was not trifling and wasn't on the cheap side of life. But today, when the new candidates walk in, we're like, oh, George Washington was a Mason. You're going to love it. We do this, we do that for charity. And we're trying to sell guys on it like we're desperate almost. And that feels cheap.
It does.
Even if dues are high at a lodge, if you're not setting that high bar that makes someone feels like they're getting in a luxury car as opposed to, a used one, we're cheapening it.
Yep.
Because the dues are certainly a factor in it, but there's so much more when it comes to cheapening in my mind.
Yeah, it's the dues and it's the letting things slide by and the begging and pleading. And, we cheapen it in many, many, many ways.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorites is you'll see a train wreck degree, and it happens to all of us. I'm not picking on anybody. But afterwards, you'll see 5 or 6 guys go up, great degree. And it's like, that wasn't a good degree,
Let's be honest.
Yeah, let's whisper some counsel and offer to floor school or something. Don't be mean, but we got to hold each other accountable.
That's so important. What you just said. We really need to hold each other accountable. And to the other side of that same coin, when a brother comes to us from a place of his heart to hold us accountable, we need to be willing to receive that counsel.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because being offended by it.
Yeah, that's hard. Because it's going to sting. It will sting, no matter how good he is at it, putting it across. Mm-hmm. It's going to sting. And it should, if you're trying to do a good job. If it doesn't sting, then you got other problems, But you're right. You've got to accept that and internalize it and how you get better.
Yep, agreed. The other weakness of our fraternity is, and this kind of goes along with the cheapening aspect, is we put too many guys in the East because it's their turn.
Ooh, yes.
And I love my brothers, but not everybody's cut out to be in the East. Maybe in time, but if they don't belong in the administrator's role, then they shouldn't be in the role, because you harm the body when you do that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes guys get elected because nobody wants to hurt their feelings. And it shouldn't be about hurting feelings. It should be about running an organization.
Yeah.
Effectively. And just prepare them for it.
I think we're all in agreement here.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And even as you mentioned earlier, 9 times out of 10, those are the guys that get done in the East and never come back. I've heard it referred to as past master's disease, but they weren't ready. Mm-hmm. And we did that to them as their brothers. We propped them up to fail. And, with a little bit of planning and foresight, that could have been avoided. And in 3 years, he'd have been the best master and loved being a past master afterwards.
Mm-hmm. You were spot on. And I love what you said. We need to own that. We prop them up. We set them up to fail.
Yeah.
And we should have never put them in that position to begin with.
No, because if we're doing those chairs right, not only will our lodge be healthy, but we'll be pumping out real leaders into the community. They have been truly baptized by fire in lodge.
Now you're speaking my language about making leaders.
Right. So one thing I talk to people a lot about are Masonic escalators, right? Because you get on the bottom stairs, you don't even have to do any work. You just stand there, don't do anything. Before you know it, you're up at the top. So we need to break those escalators and start making people take the stairs, right? Yeah. If you want to get to that level, you better start working.
Yeah.
Because it should be an acknowledgement of, what, you've acted the part of the leader. And so we have acknowledged that you are a leader in our lodge and we've elected you as such. It shouldn't be, hey, you've hung around and, you may not have done much, but, everyone else has already been through. So it's your turn.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So how can we best affect that, guys? I've got my opinion, but, Billy, you brought it up. What do you think is the best way to break that escalator and make them walk the stairs?
Well, it comes down to we have to be willing to have those difficult conversations, right? And just like was mentioned just a couple of seconds ago, right? We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings and risk losing a member. But we need to be honest and talk it over, especially as senior officers and past masters, and really kind of evaluate, right? Does this person have what it takes to lead our organization? Are they right on the cusp? And maybe there's something we can do to help, improve their skill set and, make them into the leader that we need. But, one bad leader can have an impact on the body that lasts for years. True. So you don't want to have someone in there who's just going to drive everyone away, and have your attendance just suffer because it's either bad ritual or bad leadership or, it's a terrible attitude or what have you. So I think we need to be willing to make that assessment. And then if we want that position, we need to be willing to do a self-assessment and be striving to learn the skills that we feel are going to benefit our members, that are going to help us when we do achieve those positions. So I think the primary thing here is honesty about those around us, as well as honesty about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. The one thing that I would add to that is we need to begin to inculcate a tradition in the lodge of maybe I'm not saying this right. We need to set expectations in the lodge for what does it take to be elected a junior warden? What does it take to be elected a senior warden? And not just the stuff that's in the Grand Lodge law. You need to hold a C certificate and do this and that. And, no.
Yeah.
What do we expect as members of our lodge, the junior warden, to be able to do? And not that you get into that position to learn how to do it, but you know how to do it before you get into the position, while you're learning the next position and so on.
Yeah.
That's got to come from the culture of the lodge itself.
No, and I think that goes back, because for me, it boils down to planning. Because how can you hold somebody accountable to something if there's no plan?
Agreed.
So, you got to have a plan. You've got to have the accountability to follow back with that plan. And, that's a two-way street.
Well, and that is a fair point too. If it's like they don't know what's expected of them, if you don't sit down, because say you do have that guy who's always run the lodge, right? You have a secretary who's always done everything that the master should have been doing, and he really keeps the lodge going. You can't blame a new guy if he comes in and it's like, oh, well, Bob always took care of that. So, he doesn't even know exactly what the expectation is there for his office.
Yep. That's exactly right. That's what's so important about officer duties, mission and vision statement, all that kind of stuff that creates that culture in your lodge, to where when a guy says, yeah, I think I want to be junior warden, he has a real good idea of what's going to be expected of him. Otherwise, anybody could do it if there's no expectation.
Absolutely. I guess that's why I'm so big on teaching the leadership training stuff. I'm on the Education Services Committee for Grand Lodge, where we do the leadership training. But then I also administer the leadership and training program that's run by the Grand Encampment Knights Templar United States of America for all of York Rite. And that's pretty exciting too, because we turn out a lot of good leaders out of that training program.
Well, I love the segue. We'll just jump right into that because that's our first subject question is concerning that York Rite leadership training. So, what's the purpose? Why was it created?
Well, fundamentally, the belief from the Grand Encampment is that there's not a problem that cannot be solved with good leadership. So, if we produce good leaders, then whatever problems that we may encounter in our fraternity, whether it be membership or anything else, good leaders will remedy those problems. That's really the purpose for the training.
I like that because there's always going to be problems, right?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We say that Freemasonry takes a good man and make them better. How do we do that? Well, I think we take good men and we make them great leaders. That's how we make them better. Because Freemasonry always gives you an opportunity to learn to be a leader. And you've got to be a leader of a very special group in the case of Freemasonry, because you can't dock anybody's pay. You can't subject them to penalties. You have to learn to inspire people. And that's what great leaders do.
Yeah, and if everybody thinks maintaining peace and harmony is an easy task, get you a taste of get in the line, and you'll get a taste of it. I joke that man drama, women don't have nothing on us. we spew the real drama. Mm-hmm. So, how long has that training been in place?
It's been in place now for, I think we're just now closing on 10 years. So 9 years, let's say it's been 9 years. It was originally started by a guy named John Palmer. And John is currently the editor of the Knights Templar magazine. And he's a past Grandmaster of the state of Tennessee. And John put together the very first training program. So it's kind of a one man in his one class, and started teaching that with the blessing of the Grand Encampment at various conferences around the United States, and has grown from there.
Gotcha. So when you say Grand Encampment, I immediately think of the Texas body, but this is the overseer of the United States Grand Body.
Actually, of all Templary in the world that subscribes to Grand Encampment ritual.
Right.
Yeah.
Grand
Encampment is what, 27 countries now?
Yeah, probably something like that. I couldn't tell you exactly the country count.
Yeah, because they have Europe and South America in Togo,
Philippines, right? Europe, France, Mexico.
I gotcha.
Yeah, they're all over the place.
They're doing the same ritual kind of thing under the auspice of Grand Encampment. Okay, I'll follow you because I'm just so used to the Blue Lodge structure where it's like state and it stops there. Nobody tells another state what to do, kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Silly Rhit.
As you move up in the chain of York Rite, you get into chapter and council. In chapter and council, Texas has a grand chapter and the grand council. And some other states do as well, but most of the other states subscribe to a national organization called General Grand Chapter, Royal Archmasons International, and General Grand Council of Royal and Select Masters International. We just call them General Grand for short. But the Knights Templar are very unique in that if I am in Texas and I go to Montana, mm-hmm. I'm doing the exact same ritual, wearing the same uniform. Everything's the same.
I can see the value in that.
Yeah.
Well, for the most part, I know opening and closing, there are some regional variations for it. Like when I go to Wisconsin, they have like an 8-man opening, which is different than the Texas 9-man opening or the full 18-man opening. But yeah, I believe like the actual orders themselves come from a common pool, and most of it is very similar.
The one thing that we can say is pretty much the words are going to be verbatim the same. The movements, however, are slightly different, which confused me very strongly when I was in Oklahoma. But yeah.
So, can you give kind of a broad overview of what the training encompasses?
Yeah.
Is it multi-day or multi-year?
For those listening that have been through the Grand Lodge leadership training, what we do here in Texas is we teach you how to administer a lodge. So we go through law, we go through planning, we go through the machinations of Masonry. In the York Rite Leadership Training Program, we teach hardcore raw leadership skills. This is the kind of training that is executive class training. Businesses would pay to send their executives through at $2,000 a head for this kind of training. It's offered in 3 classes. We call them 101, 201, and 401. I'll explain that in a minute. They're offered at each of the department or regional conferences across the United States. So we just recently had the South Central Department Conference where, I saw Billy and Gabe. Rhit, you were there, weren't you?
No, not me.
Okay. Well, Billy and Gabe were there. And we do all 3 classes, and each class is 1 day. So on Saturday from 8 a.m., the class starts, runs to 5 p.m., and it's a very, very full day. The 101 class is about the individual assessment of your leadership skills and how to identify those in others, and then also how to improve them. So how to take them from one level of leadership up to a higher quality or a higher level of leadership. The 201 class takes the individual leadership and moves it into a group perspective. So now that I've assessed my own skills and I've matured my skills as a leader, how do I then impact a group? How do I lead a group? We talk about setting mission statements and vision statements. How to identify group paradigms and how to change paradigms and motivate groups into action. And then the third class, which is 401, is the class that I primarily teach, and it's called Influential Communications. You may know that I am a master trainer of something called neuro-linguistic programming, which is essentially the study and the art of how people do what they do. Well, within that is the understanding of how people communicate. So I teach a day-long class on understanding how communication works in the human mind, how to structure your presentation and your content so that an entire audience of people get the information they want in the order that they want it, and make it more readily absorbable by the human mind. That's been a great class. We added that class because the premise is that it doesn't matter how good a leader you are and how much skills you know. If you're unable to communicate and you're unable to influence people and motivate them to take action, then your leadership skills are all for naught. So we added that communication component to round it out.
Yeah, that definitely sounds interesting.
It's very cool. And if anybody wants to get involved in that leadership program, it is open to all members of the York Rite family. So that's Blue Lodge, Chapter, Council, Commandery. That includes Beauseant. That includes Eastern Star. That includes Rainbow and Demolay, if the young people are mature enough. Anybody that's a member of the York Rite family can come and take this training.
So you can go, Rhit.
How much does it cost?
$0.
Free.
What? Really? Oh, Sign me up. I'll be there.
The only cost is for, of course, travel, and if you need to lodge, right? Travel, food, lodging. And then for the brother, they need to register for the conference, and that's usually like a $35 or a $45 fee.
Yeah.
But the conference gets that. The Grand Encampment pays for the training, and anybody that comes and takes the training gets the training for free. And that includes some books that, the first class is 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The second class is Principle-Centered Leadership. And then the third class is, hey guys, guess what? I published a book. And my book is the text, if you will, for the third class. It's called The Art of the Presentation, available on Amazon.com.
Awesome.
So
the third class, I promised I'd tell you this real quick. The third class used to be called 301, and it was show up at a conference and witness leadership in action and write a paper. And nobody did it, and it really didn't have any teeth. So we deprecated that in favor of 401, but we changed the number so that we can track who did 3 and who did 4.
Gotcha. I'll follow you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
And the third class, actually, so that's the one that Gabriel and I will be taking next. And you know what? You don't have to wait every year. You can actually take all 3 of them in the same year if you travel to 3 different department conferences. But I know I'm really looking forward to the 301 because 101 was fantastic. 201 was pretty good as well. But the 301, I'm really looking for, or 401. Sorry, 401 is I'm really looking forward to.
Oh, that sounds it. So it sounds like you and Gabe have the schedules. So don't leave me out when you guys go to that, because I'm starting my journey and through that. That sounds wonderful.
Oh, you need to
You're going to come to Kansas with us, and it's going to be great.
See, Rhit, you need to catch up to them. So next year you can to Mobile, Alabama, and get your 101 at the Southeast. And then you can hit South Central and get because that would be Kansas. You'd have to go up to the Northeast maybe and get your 201. That'll be in, I think, Tarrytown, New York.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and then you can come to Kansas City with these guys and join them in 401.
Yeah, I don't like them being ahead of me, Lane.
You guys know Brian Cook out of McKinney Commandery?
Oh, of course we do.
Yeah.
So Brian and Ray Vincent out of McKinney Commandery, they're on the tour this year. So they both went to Melbourne, Florida, and did 101. They did 201 at South Central in Little Rock, and then they're both coming to Las Vegas for the 401, which is next week.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so they're banging it out. I'm proud of it.
So where would is there a website Grand Encampment has that shows these dates and locations and everything?
Yeah, there is. If you go to the Grand Encampment website, the easiest way to do it is just Google Grand Encampment. It pops right up. Click on it. Then in the top line of the many links on that page, you see one that says Department Conferences. And you click on that, and it'll tell you where all the department conferences are. Okay. Now, that said, I am actively working with a fellow named Steve Balke, who's the secretary for General Grand Council. And we are standing up a website portal with registration capabilities for the leadership training class. And hopefully we'll have that done and published by January. And we'll be able to roll that out and make life a lot easier for people getting information and registering for the classes.
Oh, cool. Oh, that definitely. And there's not enough leadership training. You know what I mean? We could have it every other day and it wouldn't be enough. It's just something that's constantly evolving.
It is. It is. What's funny is I get these guys, especially when we go to the Mid-Atlantic, which is the Washington, D.C. area. I'll get these guys that come into the training class, even at 101, and they're like, I've got 30 years of military leadership experience, and I just smile and go, we'll keep an open mind. Perhaps you'll learn something. And inevitably, they always walk out going, wow, that was really good. There's a lot of stuff I already knew, but there was some stuff I didn't know.
Yeah.
Our guys put on some good training. They really did.
So I guess to kind of combine these, because these two are kind of the same. So, what do you see guys getting most out of the training? And have you witnessed anything that was like, oh yeah, that's definitely, a byproduct of the training?
Yes. And literally too many examples to tell you, but I will share with you probably one of the most immediate and most profound examples. At the end of each class, we ask every member to give us a feedback form. And this one brother turned in a feedback form, and he also handed a slip of paper over the top with it. And he said, I didn't want to include this. And he said, I don't mind if you share it, but, kind of keep my name out of it. And I shook his hand and thanked him, and he told me how much he appreciated the class. And after he left, I read his extra feedback. And what he essentially said in the note was that he had recently gone through a very ugly divorce, and that it really shook him up as a man, as a Mason, as a potential companion for a mate. And he finally figured out that if he took personal accountability, personal responsibility for not only the breakup, but also his own life, that he could stop being a victim and get on with living, get on with making the life that he wanted. Just going through that leadership class, guys, changed his life.
Wow.
And it was that fast that he decided to stop being a victim and to put the past behind him and to do something, that was worthy of him.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things I see happen all the time. And I just stand in awe of those people. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. I mean, because take the fraternity out of the situation and he's still in that mode of victim.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And those multiply that times the, million plus Masons that are in the United States. That's happening all the time. It's a beautiful thing.
Guys, this is why I say, it's not about taking a good man and making him better. It's about taking good men and making them great leaders.
Yeah.
Because great leaders aren't victims. Great leaders get results. Great leaders find solutions. Great leaders inspire people. Great leaders make things happen. And that's what this leadership program is all about.
You've definitely piqued my interest. You will see me there.
Come on, brother. You'll enjoy it. We always have a good time in class, and I'm really thankful that Billy and Gabriel had an opportunity to take those first two classes. They can give you firsthand testimony.
No doubt. So you had mentioned earlier about neuro-linguistics. How did you get interested in that subject?
Well, I was at a Masonic event. Actually, it was a DMLA event. I was there with my son, and I met another man there who was there with his son. And he was a Freemason also. And we had the what do you do for a living conversation because, that's the only way we know to create rapport with people. And this guy, besides being a jet engine mechanic for Delta Airlines, he also did stage hypnosis, comedy shows in hypnosis.
Oh, yes.
And he was a hypnotist. I thought, that's cool. I didn't know anything about hypnosis, but I thought that's really cool. Where can I learn about that? And he said to me, he said, Lane, since you're in business, you should look at NLP. And I said, well, what the hell is NLP? And he said, well, it's like hypnosis, but nobody has to close their eyes. I was like, okay. So I went home and dutifully did my research on neuro-linguistic programming. And I found this company that did classes in NLP, but they also did classes in other things. One of them was a class called Presenting Magically. And at the time in my business career, that was one of the things that I did every day. I did presentations on our software. And so I thought, well, you know, I could learn to be better at doing presentations, and my company would probably pay for it. So I signed up and took the class. And it blew my mind. It absolutely blew my mind of understanding how powerful words are and how you can use words to create results and shift people's thinking. And they taught me how to do that in presentation form. So I was fascinated at that point. I was locked in, and I went and took the NLP classes, which profoundly changed my life and the way that I viewed life. Decided to go on and become a trainer. And for about 5 years or so, I actually changed careers. I got out of high-tech sales and started training people in neurolinguistics, and then figured out, gee, I could take those neurolinguistic skills and go back into high-tech sales and probably make more money with it, which, of course, I did. But all that said, it kind of begats a little explanation as to what the heck is NLP.
Yeah.
NLP, a lot of people have a lot of different perspectives on NLP depending on where they come from. The general accepted perception of NLP is it's a psychological therapy. But that's completely wrong. Neurolinguistic programming was created by a couple of guys named John Grinder and suddenly drew a blank on his name. I can picture his face. Well, it'll come around to me in just a second.
Yeah, and it's online. I read it too. I don't remember.
Oh, Richard Bandler. That's his name.
You go.
Richard Bandler and John Grinder. Interesting characters, especially Bandler. But nonetheless, they created the concept of NLP from modeling therapists and what therapists were doing. NLP is a process. Richard Bandler says that it's a process of modeling people that leaves behind a trail of technique. So it's the discovery and utilization of how we do what we do in order to figure out the human mind, the way the human operates.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not giving you a really good description because it takes a little bit longer than that, okay?
Yeah.
But let me explain it simply this way. When you buy stuff, right, like a radio or a cell phone or pretty much anything, a Yeti cup, right? They always give you a book and they go, here's how your stuff works, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're born into these amazing bodies, but nobody gave you a book. Nobody said, here's how your body and your brain works.
Yeah.
Neuro-linguistic programming is the book. And when you understand the rules of how things work, then you can begin to be a human being on purpose. You can begin to understand how and why people are doing what they're doing. So let me give you for example. One of the things that I teach in my communications class is a simple, what we call a neurological imperative or mental imperative. It's something your brain has to do. And it's a rule. And that is that your unconscious mind cannot process a negation. negatives or negations are Boolean, rational, logical brain functions. Your unconscious mind's job is to make meaning. That's all it does. So if you understand that rule, then you understand how language works when I say, don't think of a purple dinosaur.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay? Yeah.
So your unconscious mind says, purple dinosaur. Here's what a purple dinosaur looks like. And then the conscious mind applies the negation and says, I'm not supposed to think about that. Right?
Yeah.
Now, when you get that rule, let's apply it in the context of sales, because I'm in sales. I have heard sales guys go in and tell a prospective customer, listen, I don't want you to think that our solution is complex. Well, what are they now thinking about?
Complex, yeah.
Complexity, right? Or, I don't want you to think that this is expensive. What are they now thinking about? How expensive it must be.
So their word choice is setting them up for failure?
Well, in the sense it is, isn't it?
Right.
Well, there could be there's a better way of going about it for sure.
Yeah, the rule is say it the way you want it. Right? Use good language and say it the way you want it. So, Mr. Customer, I want you to see how easy our product is to operate. Mr. Customer, I want you to see how cost effective our product is. Because if you tell them, don't think about it being expensive, don't think about it being complex, those are the rules that they're going to apply to your product.
I love that. That totally, because when I was reading about it, the best I could discern is how the subconscious and conscious interact. But that explains it very well, where, don't think about a purple dinosaur. And it's like, there's no way. I'm thinking of Barney right off the bat.
Yeah, exactly. And there's lots of rules. When you understand how things work, at the mental and emotional level, then you can begin to structure your language in a way to get really good results. I'll give you one more real quick, okay? A lot of people like to ask the why question. They'll ask, well, why this or why that?
Mm-hmm.
And what they're really trying to find out is what's the motivation behind this and what's the motivation behind that? The problem with the why question is it tends to elicit defense in the mind of the person being asked why. So if I were to say to you, Rhit, why do you do this podcast?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. Immediately you go to, well, why the hell do I need to defend it to you?
Yeah.
Why do I need to explain myself? So, just understanding those rules helps you communicate better and literally help move people into a space where they're capable of doing what it is that they dream to do.
You're sitting here talking about this, and it makes me, for some reason, think about the DARE program. Billy, you probably remember it as kids. We got the DARE program as Gen Xers on Don't Do Drugs, Just Say No. And it was the biggest failure ever, because the police would come in and show you actual drugs and don't do this drug, don't do that drug. And all we're thinking about in our minds is drugs.
Yep.
Right. And it was one of the biggest failures ever. Everything, all the use went up afterwards. And it's like, it all goes down to how our brains communicate.
Well, the best thing was that they were handing out these pencils that said DARE, don't do drugs. And as you sharpened the pencil, it would go to don't do drugs to do drugs.
I remember that. And by the way, guys, only because my children went through the DARE program, all right?
I was right. I was one of them. So when it comes to NLP, do you see a connection to that in Freemasonry?
I do. And it's quite simply this. Freemasonry teaches you all the skills you need to be in charge of your own mind. And that's what NLP does as well, is it frees you from being a victim and it puts you in control of your life. Freemasonry is the philosophical aspect of it. Neuro-linguistic programming is the practical aspect of it.
Yeah. And, just from the little description you've given, because symbols, what we teach our lessons with, speak to the subconscious, and then we translate it through the conscious. So it seems like NLP, if you know how that process works even more, how your mind translates that symbol, you're going to get a deeper understanding of those symbols as well.
Yes. The fact that we use symbols in Freemasonry is not by accident.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the greatest works in psychology was written by Carl Jung, and it's called Man and His Symbols. And it talks about how the human mind processes and interprets symbols. You've got the notion of archetypes, and then what I would call, I forget what Jung calls them, but I would call them free-floating or free interpretive symbols. Just the very shape of a symbol will already begin to form its meaning in your own mind. Here's what I mean by that, is that if I show you an octagon,
yeah,
red, what does that evoke in your mind?
You just had to say octagon and I'll start stopping.
Yeah,
putting the foot on the brake.
Now let's take it to a little bit more of an esoteric level. And since I can't draw for you, I'm just going to have to describe and let you imagine. But let's say you've got two pictures. One of them is a puffy cloud, and one of them is jagged shards of glass. Okay, which symbol is angry?
Yeah,
Jagged
I got you.
Glass.
Yeah.
Right. It's just the shape of it. If you see something that's jagged with sharp edges, that evokes anger. But if you see something rounded and smooth, that evokes calmness or happy, or not anger, if you will.
Yeah.
So symbols are incredibly powerful. That's the reason why, if you look at all the great avatars in history, Jesus Christ being one of them, he taught in symbols and in parables. He didn't tell you, think this, believe this, but rather gave you a framework upon which to apply beliefs and apply your thinking.
Let it speak to you in its own way, kind of thing. Yeah. I love it. That's no doubt. So, and this, when I was reading about this on the internet, it may be outdated, but from what I gathered, the study of NLP's kind of slowed lately. Is that the case, or is it picking up steam again?
I would say it's picking up steam, but we have to put a proper frame around it. So neuro-linguistic programming was created in the mid-'70s, really kind of the early 70s, I guess. It came out of Santa Cruz. There was a lot of computer programming was new at the time. There was a lot of drug use at the time.
Yeah.
And as a result, some of the groundwork of neuro-linguistic programming, while very, very solid, was kind of tainted. And in many ways, it was very strongly tainted by one of the guys that actually created it.
Yeah.
Richard Bandler. Bandler is an absolutely brilliant person. My undiagnosed or uneducated, unqualified diagnoses, that's what I'm looking for. My unqualified diagnosis is he's crazy as a loon.
Yeah, he kind of went the way of Tesla.
Yeah, but him in a little bit more of an evil way. He figures himself a reincarnated version of Aleister Crowley. And if you know anything about that, dark magic and can really interesting stuff. But Bandler, no doubt, is a genius, especially when it comes to hypnosis and entrancing people. And in fact, Bandler had a very bad cocaine addiction, and
he sounded more like Aleister Crowley all the time.
yeah. He, well, put it this way: his girlfriend, I think her name was Christine, I can't remember her last name, ended up dead. Shot with his gun. His shirt had blood all over it. He was arrested and brought to trial, and he defended himself. And everybody that knew Bandler knew that he was going to get off because he was going to hypnotize the judge and the jury. And he did.
Oh, wow.
And he ended up getting off. Every bit of evidence in the world. I mean, it was like, it was OJ guilty.
Yeah.
You know?
Wow.
But he himself did a lot of destruction to NLP, partly because he was just weird. And the other part is that he realized he created something very powerful, and then he tried to covet it. He tried to trademark NLP and realized he couldn't do it. So he created something to compete with it called Design Human Engineering, DHE, and trademarked that. And that began to water down NLP. And then it got let loose into what is lovingly referred to as the woo-woo community.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't want to say they destroyed it or they bastardized it or, but they just started doing a lot of things that weren't good for the field.
Yeah.
There's really good evidence that many forms of cancer they're actually of a mental cause. You have biological causes as well. But some cancers have a mental cause. And since NLP works a lot on the mental level, there were a bunch of NLP people going around saying, I can cure cancer. And that really upset the medical community.
Yeah.
So, you know, because there was no structure wrapped around it, it created a lot of confusion. Now, why was there no structure wrapped around it? Well, because it has to do with human thinking and not a pill. It's really hard to monetize that. And so, you know, nobody wanted to put rules and regs into place around it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing is that you can't put a human being into a scientific experiment and get predictable results. Because humans are dynamic and they will change right before your very eyes. And so all experimentation that's been done on the human mind, even today, is all anecdotal. You know, we talk a lot about neurotransmitters and, you know, people taking antidepressants and whatnot. Well, it is a valid Western medical procedure to take a pill like Prozac or Wellbutrin or whatever to fix your depression. But what they don't talk about is the fact that the way it's done by sampling. They give you a dose and they say, come back and see me in a week and tell me if you're any better. There's no way to measure the neurotransmitters, or the serotonin levels in the brain. So, like I said, whenever you put the human being into the experiment, all of a sudden, all your nice, pretty standardized results get mucked up because human beings change pretty quickly. And so it was hard to get a good scientific background on NLP for those grounds. Now, since that time, I'm turning around to get a book out of my bookshelf. There was a book. It's called The Clinical Effectiveness of Neuro-Linguistic Programming, a Critical Appraisal by Wake, Gray, and Burke that was published in 2013. And it is a very good profile looking at the efficacy of NLP in a therapeutic modality. So I say that to help take you on a journey of NLP was created. It was really cool, but it was such a loose structure that it lost a lot of opportunity to be an extremely credible technology.
Yeah.
And now people are going back in and researching it and giving it its proper dues.
Well, it sounds like there was just the perfect storm of a little bit of a wackadoo at the helm, the counterculture that picked it up and shoved it into the woo-woo crowd, and that not being able to be monetized. You know, nobody's seeing how it could be monetized. And that, you know, if there's no money, where are you going to invest, you know? But if it's starting to become part of clinical, you know, studies and actual practice with, you know, psychiatrists and psychologists, that's a whole different story.
There is a lot of them that are going in and picking it up now. And I'll tell you something, guys, I have seen amazing things happen. I personally know of people that have rid themselves of PTSD like in an instant. Once they apply the rules of the brain and how they store the trauma, it disappears, right?
Yeah.
And I know a lady, a nurse up in Canada that was using this technique with the Canadian military boys coming back from Afghanistan with PTSD. She would use this technique, and literally in 30 minutes to no more than 2 hours, they're done.
That's powerful stuff.
There's a fellow at the VA up here in, I forget if the VA's in Bonham or it's somewhere up there near Bonham. I think it's Bonham. And he's a student of mine. And he uses the technique and works with those guys up there. It's important to understand that NLP is a process and methodology that you can apply or teach another person so they can make the change for themselves. At no point in time can I or you change another person. They have to change themselves. We just teach them techniques. We teach them the way their brain works. And when they get that, then they can make the changes that they want.
So what would be a good resource for somebody that's looking to learn more? You know,
there's two books that I always recommend. The first one is called NLP for Dummies, right? The Dummies book. It's a really good book. The other one that's a bit more hardcore, it's a smaller book, but it is to me is the epitome of the core of NLP. It's called Magic of NLP Demystified. And the authors on that are Pucelik, Pucelik, and I got to turn around. For some reason, I'm forgetting names of authors tonight. Lewis. Yeah. Pucelik and Lewis. Lewis.
Cool,
but it really gets down to the nitty-gritty of how we process this experience that we call reality.
That's always an interesting subject because it kind of, I get the picture of neuro-linguistics can kind of put you more in the driver's seat of your brain, you know, because it sounds like we're in the passenger seat right now and nobody's driving. We just got our foot on the pedal.
That's the whole point.
Yeah.
I was talking to a brother earlier today. Actually, it's the brother that's in charge of the content for the 201 class. And I told him, I said, I got something I want you to add to 201. It's about values and value systems thinking. And I was explaining to him how values are what we find important. So if I were to ask you what's important to you about Freemasonry, there's some things that would pop up in your mind. And those are your values for Freemasonry. Which, by the way, if you want to solve the membership problem, you have to give people what they value.
Yeah.
Then they'll keep coming back. Okay.
Yeah.
So I was explaining to him that values, a collection of values, form beliefs, and then your values and beliefs around a particular subject form your attitudes. So if you have a value of Freemasonry, you say, well, my value is to learn something new, to understand esoteric philosophical ideas, to have companionship, to be of service. Those are my values around Freemasonry, okay? And then if in those values, my experience tells me, let me say this over. If my experience doesn't satisfy those values, in other words, I'm not having companionship. So, I show up at a lodge and nobody knows me and they all cloister together and eat their dinner and I'm sitting there by myself, right?
Yeah.
That's not companionship. If everybody talks about how expensive college is and nobody's talking about why the ruffians move anti-clockwise and everybody else move clockwise, okay, that's not appealing to my esoteric need for learning. So if my experience doesn't match my values, then I begin to form a belief. And the belief is that maybe the belief would be Freemasonry is for people that just want to get together and complain. So then what does that translate into attitude? I don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah.
Right? And I was explaining that to this brother, and he was like, yeah, I get it. I understand how we can apply that to leadership.
It is literally like a mathematical equation, experience plus value equals beliefs.
So
sum of your attitude.
So are values and value systems the most immediate application of neuro-linguistic programming to Masonic leadership, or is there a more direct application?
The more direct application is what I teach in 401, and that is how to communicate.
Dang it.
Yeah.
Hashtag spoilers.
Hashtag spoilers. And hey, there's room for you in Vegas. Come on, baby.
Oh, that sounds pretty good.
Nice. Well,
way.
You guys got anything else for Lane before we do quote of the week?
That's it. That was my question.
No, it's been a great conversation.
Oh, wonderful.
I've enjoyed it, guys. And if you can't tell, I mean, I could go on and talk for, 2 weeks.
No, it sounds like we need to have you back on just for neuro-linguistics. That is such an interesting topic. I would like to read up on it a little more and definitely have a better conversation about that.
Okay, well, I gave you the references: Freemasonry for Dummies and Magic of NLP Demystified. Those are the two books that don't presuppose you already know something.
Yeah, and that's what I need. Okay, so quote of the week. It's not a Mason, so it's quote of the week, but I thought it was very fitting and one of my favorite authors. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And that was by Viktor Frankl. He was he wrote Man's Search for Meaning and was a survivor of Auschwitz concentration camp.
That is so profound, especially when you know more about the story of him going through Auschwitz and how he came to this understanding.
It gives me goosebumps.
Yeah. If anybody listening hasn't read Man's Search for Meaning, let me tell you something. That should be on the high school required reading list right there.
You're right. Absolutely. And it's such an easy read because it's so engaging and it's short.
Yep.
I've got the book, but also I've bought the audio book and have listened to it several times too. I think I got it for $1.99 or something.
Wow.
And it's like 4 hours long, and I'll just pop it on every once in a while because you want to talk about some momentum mori now. It'll get you right.
Hey, if I could just make one quick shameless plug for my book.
Please.
The Art of the Presentation is available on Amazon.com. Just type in The Art of the Presentation. For those of you that are coming to the Leadership 401 class in the York Rite Leadership Program, I do email everybody an electronic version that I've branded for distribution by the Grand Encampment. But if you want to go online and get one, it's I've got some really good feedback on it so far. I'm pretty proud of it. It's exciting to have done that.
Yeah, that's quite the accomplishment. It's definitely writing a book's no easy task.
No, writing it's easy. Editing it sucks. Yeah, the edit process is really painful. When I don't know about you, but when I write something, I can read it 1,000 times and I will read it the way I intended to write it, even though it's not written that way.
Yeah, and you can ask Gabe and Billy. I'm king of run-ons and misspells and improper grammar. Once I start writing, I can't keep up, kind of thing. And I'm editing mine it looks like a gutted pig.
Oh my.
Right. Well, what I found is after I go back, and editing is painful because you catch all the mistakes you made. But then if you actually take the time to read it aloud, even when you think it's perfect, you catch a whole bunch more mistakes.
That's very true. Yeah. Very true.
Well, guys, I want to thank you for having me on. I've really enjoyed the brotherhood and the fellowship and the conversation. And, I only wish we could have done this in person with, a couple of pints around.
Next time we'll make that happen.
Right. Maybe that should be a focus for next season.
Yeah, I think you're right. Need to plan some in-persons. All right, Gabe, you want to throw out contact info and we'll shut this bad boy down?
Sure. Folks, if you want to learn more about us, you can find our lodge's website at www.fortworth148.org. We are at Fort Worth Lodge 148 on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Our email is fortworthlodge148@gmail.com. And you can learn more about our educational symposium, Texas Masonicon 2020, at www.texasmasonicon.com. And please remember to write a review of the show and rate us.
Oh, yeah. NPR moment.
Yeah.
Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation as well and look forward to some leadership training in the not so far future. But until next time, this is Rhit Moore signing off.
This is Billy Hamilton signing off.
This is Gabe Jagush signing off.
Lane's gone too. Have a great evening, guys.